Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. I mentioned last time in our previous good news segment, as we're working our way together through the Gospel of Matthew, that Matthew sort of gives us the headlines, not a lot of details of the stories that he's covering early on in the life of Jesus. As we come to chapter 2 of Matthew, there is a little bit more detail, but I want to suggest to you that, well, for me anyway, this lack of details creates a peculiar temptation. That is simply that I want to know more. I wish I knew so much more about the life of Jesus from the time he was born until he began his public ministry. God in his providence is determined not to tell us anything beyond what we already have, and he knows what to do best, so I'm wrong, but I do have that temptation, and I have it here as well, even though this is sort of that part of the story where Jesus is kind of off camera. It begins this way, Matthew chapter 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who's been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. Now, a couple of corrections here that are in order to sort of push back against our Christmas traditions. One is we have no reason to believe that this happened on the very night that he was born. The text doesn't say that, and in fact we do know, as we get to Herod's response in the massacre of the innocents, that he had a window of 2 years for the male children that he put to death. And so we don't know that this at all was at the exact same time that he was born. I don't know that I've seen anything that says it couldn't possibly be, but neither do we have anything that says it definitely was. In the same way, we don't know that there were 3 wise men. The text doesn't say there were 3 wise men. There might have been 3 wise men. There might have been 2 wise men. There might have been 300 wise men. We don't know. The text doesn't say. The reason our tradition has there were 3 wise men is because they came bearing 3 gifts. And so we just, the assumption, which is not a safe assumption at all, and it's a kind of a leap, is that because there are 3 gifts, there had to be 3 guys. Now, when I say I want to know more, I not only want to know more about what they were thinking, what they were looking for, but I also want to know where they learned these things. Where did they learn these things? Now, they knew, and the prophet does say in the Bible that Jesus, the king, would be born in Judea. But what's all this star stuff? And how did they know? They're kings from the east. Well, one possibility, and I think this is the best I can come up with anyway, one possibility is that this is a result of the exile, and that these are descendants of those who learned things from Daniel. Daniel was such a position of importance and power and acknowledged for having such wisdom that he might have revealed some things that were sort of passed down amongst the wise men in this eastern country, and that's why they came. So that's my best guess, but it just always strikes me as fascinating that there's stuff out there that God was doing that he hints at, or that connects to the story that he tells us, but he doesn't tell us much about it. This is one of those times. The other thing I want to make sure that we notice is this. It's very difficult for us to understand the nature of government at the time of the life and ministry of Jesus. We do know that the Roman Empire ruled over most of the known world, and so ultimately it was Caesar who was in charge, but we also know that there were divisions of various and sundry kinds into sort of sub-regions of the empire that had rulers, but then also we have local rulers. And so because of that confusion, it's very easy to miss the great irony of the question being asked to Herod. Who's this Herod guy? Well, Herod is the king. Herod is Jewish. He's the Jewish king. Now, he is a, what's the word for it? A lame duck king. He's a puppet king. He doesn't exercise ultimate power. He has to check with his Roman overlords. But he is the Jewish king. And he's the Jewish king. And these strangers show up and say, where's the Jewish king? They're asking the guy who thinks he is the king of the Jews where the king of the Jews is. It's not him. This is no doubt the reason why he was so troubled. I got to tell you, just for what it's worth, I think the actor in what's the name of the movie? There's just a Christmas or a movie about the birth of the Nativity. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. In the movie The Nativity, the guy who plays Herod just does an outstanding job and just looks mean and nasty. So, Chapter 2 deals with these folks coming, and we're going to get next time to God's grace toward Jesus and Joseph and Mary and their flight into Egypt, and we're going to talk about some of the significance of that. For now, let's remember that wise men still seek. It's time for another one of our Curating Your Book Library segments, and the reason it's time for that is because I just recently completed yet another book by one of my favorite authors, Erik Larson, E-R-I-K-L-A-R-S-O-N. Erik Larson, we have covered in previous Curating Your Library segments. He is a writer of nonfiction, of history, but he writes in such a beautiful and compelling way that one of the common themes of those who are grateful for him is what a wonderful job he does in writing like you're reading a novel. The very first book, which is his most well-known book, if I can remember the name, The Devil in the White City, that's what it is the first one I read. It's an account of the World's Fair in Chicago in 1903, and simultaneously and in the same place, the account of the first American serial killer. And that's particularly interesting. Another one that I read, can't remember the title, tells the story of the American ambassador to Germany around 1936 and his family and how that was. Now he goes back to World War II in The Splendid and the Vile. This book zeroes in on one particular year in the life of Winston Churchill during the time of the London Blitz. It's the first year of Churchill serving as Prime Minister of Great Britain. And so it recounts the various and sundry military events connected to the Blitz of London. That is the ongoing, continual bombing of England, and particularly of London, early on during that war. There are glimpses into what's going on in Germany at the time. You get a little bit of a decent glimpse into the life and character of Hermann Goering, who was the head of the German Air Force. We meet and spend a little bit of time with, what is his name? I can't believe I can't remember his name. The fellow who flew to England and spent decades and decades and decades in prison. He was Hitler's personal secretary, and he had actually been charged by Hitler to try to get England to broker a deal, and so they could stop having to fight against England and concentrate their focus on the Eastern Front, the battle with Russia. In the meantime, as you're reading through the story, you watch the nuances and the growth and the shifting of the relationship between Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because so much of Churchill's hopes were grounded in getting the United States to come into the war. And we sort of go through this stages of that happening, where we begin with no involvement from the United States whatsoever. Eventually, the United States is persuaded to essentially give the British Navy 50 very, very old and about to be discarded warships, and what that meant, and eventually the Lend-Lease program, whereby essentially we just armed Britain for its battle with just about everything they could use up until, of course, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and that was the final straw that drew America into World War II. Now, I don't know that it's possible to read anyone. I mean, maybe that's a good advice for young writers. I don't think it's possible to read anyone talking about Winston Churchill without it being interesting. I have a lot of ideological disagreements with the man, and yet I can't help but just be completely taken with him and his character. When I was a young man, my father instructed me to read William Manchester's biography of Churchill, The Last Lion. He also made me underline and learn every vocabulary word I didn't know when I came to the book, and actually literally went through the pages and quizzed me word for word. But all that to say, Churchill is just a fascinating character. And as Larson does all the time, we get glimpses into private lives in a way that's not designed to be scandalous, but designed to help us see how personal all of this is, that these are real people. We watch Mary Churchill, Churchill's daughter, going out on dates with different fellows, and Churchill dealing with his own personal financial debt situation. And I mean, it's just great. Larson is great. This is, I think, the fourth I've read. There's the serial killer one, the ambassador one, this one, and the other one was escaping me. The one on the sinking of the Lusitania was just really, really good. So if you haven't read Erik Larson and you just like to read a good book just for fun, again, my goal always in this Curating Your Book Library is to give you books that are valuable and important and significant and profoundly enjoyable. Well, you can't go wrong hitting all those buttons with Erik Larson, and specifically The Splendid and the Vile. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.